This is a Newsmax TV Money Report. I'm Kathleen Walter. The effects of last year's financial implosion on Wall Street and in Washington are still being felt across the country. Now, an acclaimed New York Times reporter is telling the inside story in a new book, Too Big to Fail. The inside story of how Wall Street and Washington fought to save the financial system and themselves. Joining us on Newsmax TV is Andrew Ross Sorkin, a financial columnist for the New York Times and the newspaper's chief mergers and acquisitions reporter. Welcome to the Newsmax TV Money Report, Andrew.
Hey, Kathleen, how are you?
Andrew, you deliver a behind-the-scenes, moment-by-moment account of how the greatest financial crisis since the Great Depression developed into a global tsunami. What did you learn?
Well, I learned a couple things. I learned that actually once you get inside the room and behind the scenes, I think that the story that we know from the headlines actually becomes a very different story and almost becomes a human drama about what many of these people knew in advance, which is almost a little scary in terms of I think a lot of people actually saw this train barreling down the track, CEOs, people in government, and they weren't telling us. And I think that was actually one of the biggest surprises. And then on the other side, the other big surprise was just how far and how close we were to the financial abyss, if you will. You know, I think there's been a lot of debate about, you know, TARP and what it's meant to save us from ourselves in some sense. And I don't think we appreciated how bad it was really about to get.
Mm-hmm. Now, you interviewed just about every major player involved in the crisis. How were decisions really made to save the financial system?
Well, you know, I think that was also one of the more sort of remarkable surprises for me, which was that the relationships, almost the incestuous nature of this small fraternity of frankly 20 or 30 people, mostly men, how those relationships over 10, 20, 30 years and little slights and petty jealousies and things that had happened in their relationships ended up impacting billion-dollar decisions to save Lehman Brothers, or in this case, let Lehman Brothers go, decisions to save AIG, to pump $85 billion into it, the decisions around what to do with Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, all of those things were really as much about the system as they were about the people. So Hank Paulson and Ben Bernanke and Tim Geithner, all of whom were trying in their own way to do different deals, but all of them had their own relationships with those folks on Wall Street, including Hank Paulson, obviously, who used to be CEO of Goldman Sachs.
You write that the government was willing to go to great lengths to save an ailing Morgan Stanley from going under and bringing Goldman Sachs down with it. Tell us exactly what it was willing to do and why. I mean, just how big were these hoops that they were willing to jump through?
What an extraordinary weekend. You know, we all focus on the Lehman Brothers weekend, but it's actually the weekend after, which is more interesting. And during that weekend, there was a view that Morgan Stanley literally was going to go bankrupt that Monday, and that Goldman Sachs would follow them 30 seconds later. In fact, Lloyd Blankfein gets on the phone. He's the CEO of Goldman Sachs with the CEO of Morgan Stanley, John Mack, and says, "You better hang on because I'm 30 seconds behind you." And it was the domino after that, by the way, which was even more interesting, which was that there was a view that General Electric was going to go bankrupt. So that all of a sudden, this idea of this problem only infecting and affecting Wall Street was going to infect Main Street. And what Hank Paulson and Tim Geithner were trying to do at that point was set up a series of mergers for Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. In fact, they started calling Tim Geithner eHarmony because he was trying to put everybody together and play matchmaker. One of those deals would have put Goldman and Citi together. Another one of those deals would have put Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan together. In fact, Hank Paulson and Tim Geithner and Ben Bernanke got on the phone with John Mack of Morgan Stanley and told him, "Sell yourself to Jamie Dimon for $1 a share."
Now tell us, should Tim Geithner be fired in your opinion, as some, including super investor Jim Rogers, suggest now?
You know, I'm probably not the best person to answer that question, but I think there's no question when you look at Tim's record, it's mixed. He was on the police force and at the scene of the crime and remains such. You know, I think there's some benefit for having somebody who's been there and seen it all before, because the learning curve nearly isn't as steep. But at the same time, I'd suggest that you probably want to pair him with somebody with an outside perspective. Part of the problem throughout this entire period was just the amount of groupthink. And again, you have the same people working on the same problems today. And so I think you do want to bring in that outside perspective, but at the same time, I think you want some people with some experience sitting at that table too.
Bernanke seems to have saved Wall Street, but can he save us now from what it took to save the street? And do you believe that he should be reappointed?
You know, I think he's actually done a very good job, a better job than we've probably given him and Hank Paulson credit for. In fact, I suspect, as hard as it is to say, that while a lot of these people, a lot of the problems happened on their watch, and you can argue they brought us to the brink, I think you could also argue they brought us from the brink and kept us from going over that cliff. And I think Ben Bernanke is one of those people who, in terms of monetary policy, really followed it by the book and did most of the right things, actually.
Do you expect another major downturn for banks and credit availability in general?
Great question. Great question. I suspect not in terms of a crisis of the magnitude we just saw. But having said that, I remain worried that we haven't seen tremendous changes in regulation, and I don't think that Wall Street has actually changed that much, nor will change. And what I think worries me the most is what happens 2, 3, 4 years out when memories on Wall Street become short and people start leveraging up and adding on debt all over again.
Right. Gold has broken records and seems poised to cruise even higher. Is this just panic, or do you believe that it is a prudent investment for now?
Another great question. I wish I had a good answer for you. You know, gold really has risen. Most people would tell you that there is a gold bubble, and anytime something becomes too high, people either want to keep believing, which is what we did in 2007 before, of course, it falls again. So I suspect that gold is never a bad investment, but at this level may be priced just about right.
Andrew, I'd like to get back to your book. Who, in your opinion, is to blame for the financial crisis, and to what extent could this crisis have been averted?
Another great question. I think that when you look at the seeds of this debacle, they actually go back 10 years. And you have to start thinking about deregulation. Phil Gramm, who deregulated the banking business. You have to start thinking about Sandy Weil, who put Citigroup together. You have to start thinking about monetary policy and Alan Greenspan, who kept interest rates at remarkably low levels. And then the entire push towards home ownership in this country, which seemed like a good thing at the time, but really has come back to bite us. And so there are so many fathers of this crisis that to blame just one is probably unfair.
Just how different is the reality from what Americans were told happened about this financial crisis? And in your opinion, what is the shape of our economy right now? Are we indeed in a recovery as the government says we are?
You know, I think we are in a bit of a recovery. The question is, how sustainable is the recovery? We've seen the numbers get better, the market keeps getting better, and yet the jobless number, even though it's gotten a smidgen better just recently, isn't all that great. You have 10% unemployment. The real number, by the way, is called underemployment, and that's 17%. Mm-hmm. That's a much higher number. So we're going to have to be able to get that number down before you're going to really make whatever recovery we have feel like a recovery, because otherwise it just feels like we're still in a recession.
All right, Andrew Ross Sorkin, congratulations on the book, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV Money Report.
Sarah Palin's new book, Going Rogue in American Life, will be released on November 17th. You can be among the first to get your copy. Check out our incredible free offer for Sarah's new book. Just go to Newsmax.com and click on the top banner for this great offer. Act today.